Our interview this afternoon is with Charles Issac Powell. Charles was born Dallas, Texas in November of 1944.
Now,
And I'm sorry?
I was raised in Henderson County.
Okay.
That's
I missed one here and we'll just get it right now. The dates you were in the service.
67 from November 66 to 68.
Okay. Okay. Now that we've established that, Charles was in the U.S. Army from November of 66 to November of 68. His highest rank attained was E5, Specialist 5. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Thursday, September the 12th, 2013. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Charles in any way. Also in the room is Milton Gibson, who is our videographer. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and also for Operation Remember in Burleson, Texas. And with that little introduction, Charles, you can tell us about your time in the U.S. military, sir.
Well, basic training, it's nothing to that. You just go in and they don't they don't give you any specific training except for the basics. And when I got out of basic, they picked a bunch of us that had for the mechanical abilities, and they collected us all at Fort Lewis, Washington, and we spent several months there. And we were just, they had time to observe you and see if you could do anything. And from that point, we got a leave and went home for just a little while and came back to Fort Lewis, and they loaded us on an airplane. We landed in Fairbanks, Alaska. Then we landed in Japan, and then we landed at Phuket Air Base in Vietnam, and that was beginning of a pretty good experience. I didn't see that much action. A lot of folks did, but I didn't, and a lot of them in my unit saw quite a bit of action. And we had a job to do. They put us over there where there was 30 D7 dozers, and we had to assemble the cabs and all of the bull blades and the KG blades. And our lieutenant, he had a pretty tough job. He's trying to get equipment and stuff from all of the other companies that for us to work with, because they didn't provide us any kind of a maintenance deal. They sent a bunch of mechanics and a bunch of welders, which that's what I was, a welder. They sent us over there, but we didn't have the equipment to work with. We had 30 brand new D7 dozers. And we got out there, lieutenant was going from one commander to another one trying to borrow a crane or a front end loader or whatever, so we could pick up the heavy parts on those cabs and assemble them and then set them on the back of the tractors. And some of the guys, we got to talking, and I told them that at home we had tree pushers on the front of the bull blade dozers, and that if we could find a big beam, we could pick those things up with a bull blade dozer and assemble to get all that stuff ready. And lieutenant come back in one time, and he was surprised we had about 10 or 15 of those dozers together. And I was welding the back legs down on the cabs, me and Dwayne Roby, and Treblehorn. He's in this deal out here. And from that point on, every time we'd get 4 or 5 of them ready, well, they'd send them to locations and start them working. And some of those boys were from New York City and just all over the country. And when they first got there, some of them didn't even know how to crank a dozer, let alone operate it. But from the time when they'd get the taste of running that dozer, in probably a month or a month and a half, you could have put them out on the job working for a public contractor out here somewhere. They was good and they was quick to learn. And we went through several towns there. It'd be hard for me to remember the names of them. We lost our first two people on Mangyang Pass. The brakes played out on their truck. They was hauling a D7 dozer and it was on a down incline going down. The brakes faded out and they couldn't get it down into a lower gear, and it went over the side. And you know, that kind of wake you up that, hey, we got a serious job out here. And went several other places, and we cleared 400 meters on each side of QL-19. I'd say from the little base camp that they carried us to from Phuket Air Base was about 60 miles out into the country, the boonies. And we got on QL-19 there, and that and all of the other work that we did just piecemeal in different places. We cleared 400 meters on each side of QL-19, plumb up to Kontum and Dak To. And Dak To was the last place I worked over there. And there's just a lot of stuff that happened that we were pushing timber down and burning it, and the not helicopters, I forget what kind of plane they was using, but they'd come over and spray that underbrush with tree killer, because if they hadn't, it'd grow back up around our feet. That was the fastest growing timber I've ever seen. And I've sat in there a while ago, and stories would come back, but you know, you don't remember them till somebody spurs your interest by he'll tell his story, and then that'll bring back one that you've known. And the first group we sent out, I think Treblehorn was on it, and a friend of mine named Everett Smith was he was one of the few that was actually an experienced dozer operator, because his dad had a contracting company here in Texas before he got in there. And we just pretty soon we got a reputation for taking what we had and making do with it. And these boys that come after us, they've took up where we stopped, and I think they've done a whale of a job, because by that time the Viet Cong had realized that those dozers weren't tanks. And we had a little bit of an advantage, because they were scared of the dozers as they were of tanks. They didn't realize that dozer couldn't shoot back at them. But before we left, they was beginning to realize that it was pretty helpless character. And our second guy to get hurt was Schoonover, Schoonover. And him and his shotgun we was clearing the sides of a QL-19, and they come into a convoy was coming down the road. Well, the Viet Cong had set up an ambush in the trees and stuff, and what their intentions was to shoot the beginning, the front one and the back one, get those people trapped there, and then they could just shoot them up and then hook them. And the guy that was supposed to get the front vehicle, the other ones let Schoonover clear past him. But when he got up there, the one that was supposed to take the lead vehicle out got scared, I guess, and shot the dozer. and it was a 40 millimeter rocket, and it went through like 1 3/4 or 2 inch solid steel, and then took the front end off of the motor. And the amazing thing was, the two kids that we had on our dozer, they lost their eardrums, and that was it. And the VC that fired the rocket, the backblast killed him.
Wow.
And you know, just my job was to go out and pick up the dozer. The lieutenant rode out with me, and we went out and got the dozer and came back. And we started out to rebuild it, and it was just too much of a project. We didn't have the time to rebuild one. We was gonna be there a year, and you can't take a month out of your work to do that. So we started robbing parts off of it and putting them on the ones that we could keep going. And I personally think our job saved a lot of folks because of the fact that they could get close enough to the road that they didn't miss the convoys, and they could shoot them up under with cover. And I think that 400 meters was a lifesaver for a lot of folks. And I've read a little bit about it, and evidently some of the generals and stuff that had let stuff be written about it felt the same way, because after we left, I understand that they put in a complete maintenance crew that followed the dozers. And the first 3 months we spent in more or less a base camp, and the rest of the time we lived on the ground. We'd go into a base camp, and the officers would start chewing on us about our uniform being out of ragtag and all kinds of stuff. But out there, you carried the minimum that you could live with. And well, it was just like about 9 months of camping out and following D7 dozers. That's about all there was to it. I don't remember if I got shot at all. It was one time, and I'm not even sure of that. But I sure put in a lot of hours working. In order for us to get a welder to do welding on our equipment, I'd have to go and work. I was a pretty fair welder, and a lot of those rock quarries, they had people that were assigned, but they had no previous experience, and you just don't step into any job without getting a little experience. And I was constantly welding on rock quarry stuff and heavy equipment all the time that I was over there. And it was just a pretty good deal. I had fun, and I had to worry a few times, but I don't recall having any mental problems over it. My wife would disagree, but she's subject to a lot of my BS, I guess. But I've always been the type of person that I made the best out of what I had to do. And when I got home, I probably had about as many problems as any of the rest of them, but you can only worry about that stuff for a little while, and then you got to get back to living or die. And I sure didn't want to die, so I made the best of that too. And in talking to these boys here, this is my first time to be around them. The biggest majority of them was the same way. When they come home, the war was over. I felt sorry for the ones that took my place, and I'm sure they did, the ones that took their place. But I guess about the secret to my making it through the military was I was raised on a farm, and if you got an old cultivator and a plow brakes on it, you learn how to weld. And if if you can't, you get your neighbor to do it, and you stay in good stead with him. So I ain't got too good a personality, so I just I learned how to weld at home, and it kept me in a. I'm pretty sure that I didn't see as much as the rest of those boys saw because of my job, because it kept me busy repairing and working. And there was 62 of us went over there at the same time on the same flight. And you know, there was New York Yankees, there was Yankees out of the Midwest, there was Southern Dixiecrats or whatever you want to call us, and we all got in that group of folks. And you know, I don't recall any serious problems amongst the whole bunch. We melded together, and we had a job to do, and I think we did it. And according to what I've read, these boys that came after us did a good job too, because they've got a lot more written about them than us. They seem like the same type of people. They was chose for the job they could do. That's all I can tell you.
Well, let me back up and you grew up in Henderson County.
Henderson County.
Right. On a farm.
Yes, sir.
How big a farm?
I think my granddad, he left my dad 20 acres. There was 7 of them kids, so he had 140 acres. And my dad managed to get a couple of hundred, and I've bought about that much or a little more. But what I was raised up on was a 90-acre place and a 56-acre place.
You run some cows?
Yep, I'm still doing that. My granddad was a crop farmer.
Okay.
He come from Illinois, about 60 miles north of St. Louis. And most people that come from Illinois talk about Chicago and the river that runs through there, Mississippi. But he always talked about a little place named Apple Creek. And he said if he ever got the money to go back up there, he was going to pull his shoes off and wade in that creek. I don't guess he ever got to go back, but I did. My son-in-law was in the service in Missouri, and we got that far away from home, and I decided we just drove up there, and I saw Apple Creek. And it's a whole lot like the little creek that run through our place, Cedar Creek. But I tell you, growing up was a lot tougher than the Army was.
You go to high school over there somewhere?
I went to Malakoff High School.
Okay.
We lived in the Malakoff School District for 12 years. Left there and went to junior college. And between those 2 times, I worked for my uncle in a machine shop, and I worked for dozer operators, and just about anything you could do. Had to make some money because you had to pay what the farm didn't. And can't say that I ever did without a meal. We always ate good. And my mother and dad raised I was the only one in their family. They raised me and one of my uncles and 7 of his kids. One of my aunts on my mother's side raised 2 of her kids, and they was a lot better folks than me. They was constantly helping somebody all the time. And I can take you out there and talk to each one of those people about 10 minutes, and I can tell you what their folks were like because I paid attention. And they all come from some good folks too.
Graduated high school, went to junior college, 2
Yeah.
years.
Oh, I drafted out of junior college.
You were going to college and they drafted you?
Well, yeah, I had 2 jobs to pay my way,
Wow.
and
You didn't have a student deferment, I guess?
well,
S2, I
I've
guess
got-
it was?
I got some mixed emotions about the draft service. One of the ladies that was over the draft service down there, her son was the same age I was, and he had one of them GTO Pontiacs, and me and him both was making about the same grades. I was working and he was playing, and it come time for her to choose somebody to go in the Army, and it was me or him, and I wound up in the Army.
Having Mama on the draft board was
It
a
helped.
good thing, huh?
And I don't wish him no harm. I'm proud for him. He probably went later on, but
What'd you have up against that GTO?
I was on foot. I burned up
Oh.
a lot of shoe leather. I rode a school bus to junior college,
Okay.
and if they hadn't have bothered me, I might have finished it all in 4 years.
Were you taking some kind of engineering courses?
I
Charles?
was, yes, and it was, I was doing good in the physics, I was doing good in all of the sciences, trigonometry, all of the math. Once I realized that, hey, this is how they measure across the tank, you don't have to swim over there with a tape measure. Once I realized that, I picked it up and did good, but English just, it kept me from being a welding engineer. I wasn't very good. You can tell by the way I'm talking that I wasn't very good at English. And
Like growing up on the farm, though, and you mentioned it before, you got to be a pretty good mechanic because when something broke in the field, you had to fix it.
if you don't get a crop in the ground at the right time, things get pretty thin till next year.
You got drafted. Now, did you go to basic training somewhere?
I went to basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Fort Polk, okay. Down there with the skeeters and what have you.
There wasn't no mosquitoes out when I went through
Oh,
there.
you went in the wintertime?
No, it was so hot that they'd burnt their wings up.
Oh, okay.
No, it was November. It was in November. But it's still hot down there.
Is that the first time you'd been away from home, Charles?
Well, I'd been on 2 or 3 trips with my family. I think I'd seen the battleship Texas. I'd never been out of Texas. That's the first time I got out of Texas. And,
Leesville, is it?
well, they had another name for it
Oh.
too.
Okay.
You went down there, didn't you? Or
No, I was Navy.
you
No.
mentioned it a while ago, so you know that.
You didn't have a lot to worry about in basic because there was always somebody telling you what you should be doing.
About halfway through, there was a real smart kid. When we got off of the bus, they picked him out real quick, and they give him one of those little sleeves that had the 3 stripes on it. Slipped it up on his arm, and he just fell all to pieces about halfway through. And I don't blame him. because they put it on my arm, and I finished the little tour we had there. And it's tough enough to do your own job, and it's even tougher to help other people. But when you get a man that don't want to be in there, he can work a crew to death. And that's what happened to us. And I had to threaten a man's life nearly, and he saw the light, and he said, I'm making it hard on y'all, so I'm not going to whoop you right now. And he didn't. He started shaped up, and we got it all over with. But they chew on your butt for everything somebody else does, and if they'd offered me E5 instead of Spec 5, I wouldn't have took it, because I just don't like being responsible for somebody else. I don't mind helping anybody, but I don't like being responsible. And when I got on the Dallas Fire Department, I did my job, and I never took a test to go any further. And I retired with a lot smaller pension, but I don't spend very much, so I do all right.
Still live on a farm, do you?
Oh yeah, same farm, family farm.
After Fort Polk,
Yeah.
you go right to Fort Lewis, or did you have a advanced?
I came home for about 3 or 4 days and
Okay. And then went to Fort Lewis.
went to Fort Lewis.
And if I understand,
Got my tattoo.
You had-
Got my tattoo just over the mountain from Fort Lewis. It cost $7.50, and they told me it was going to cost me $700 to get it taken off, and I wish I'd have done it, because it's a lot more than that now. Man shouldn't ride on his body. He don't need to.
okay, when you went to Fort Lewis, the fact that you were already a pretty good welder, that's really what kind of set the tone. They didn't give you any particular training. These other boys we've talked to, they went to Fort Leonard Wood for crawler training, I think was
Well,
the
that's
term.
the 538.
Right.
Yeah.
But you were the 35th. You were the forerunner.
I was the
You were
20.
the
Yeah, 35th.
35th.
But now, when we first got over there, we was known as 339th Engineering.
Okay.
We were assigned to 339th, and actually we were assigned to 339th at Fort Lewis. And I went through half of Vietnam thinking 339th. I didn't know it was 35th, and I found that out later. And but when you're out in the boonies, you don't get a lot of orders. You don't get a lot of officers in your way. You go out there to do a job. It's dirty. It's nasty. The first thing you'd do at every river crossing was get off and take a bath. And
You ever think about what might
officers
be in-
don't bother you too much. In
You ever
a place
think
like
what might be in that water? And
Didn't-
I don't mean chemicals or whatever, but
didn't
snakes
care.
or
There was
alligators.
probably
or-
3 or 4 of them on us anyway. You don't traipse around out there without getting bit by every insect in the woods, and
Okay.
sleep at night. And that was tough. Monsoon season was pretty good, because those mosquitoes could fly in the summertime without burning up. And if it was raining real hard, you didn't have to worry about the mosquitoes much. We had a net to sleep under and a cot assigned to us. And I don't recall getting to use that very much. You'd push out a clean spot and walk the dozer up over it, and there'd be 2 or 3 sleep under there. The ones that had the machine shop van, I slept on it quite a few times.
You had a machine shop
It
van,
was a van that had
like they would
it
have
had a lathe.
metal lathe.
The lathe had the milling attachment, shaper attachment, and they kept me pretty well tied to that van, because I could do machine work too. I was a machinist, and I was the only one in the crew at that time that could run the lathes and stuff. And I got pictures of nearly everybody that was over there because I had the only set of hair clippers in the group. We took turns cutting each other's hair.
Machine shop. You would, if you're going to turn, I don't know, bearing housing or even a sprocket, something,
You mean line board?
whatever, something like that.
I-
Where'd you get the material? Or did you just rework the parts that came off the machine?
The best thing they did for me is they sent 2 cans of 7018 welding rod with every one of those KG
Okay,
blades.
so you'd build up whatever and then turn it back off.
You'd have to build it up and turn it back down. Now I didn't do a whole lot of that. Most of my stuff, the other people around the camp, when they found out that we could run that lathe, they kept me and Roby pretty busy. I built a bunch of they called them sear pins. Somebody brought me the material and I cut them and turned them to the right size, and there were little bitty pins, and I don't know if the old boy was pulling my leg. I had no reason to, and he said they was going to use those on those miniguns. The minigun was bad about searing those sear pins, and they'd have to put a new one in before they could. And they kept a bunch of them, but they'd get low on them, and I built a bunch of them, and I don't know whether they worked or whether they didn't. I never saw him again, but you know, that's what made the time pass by fast was just staying as busy or playing hard, either one of the two.
You were maintenance on
Maintenance.
basically bulldozers.
Yes, sir. But I got my training in a machine shop working for an uncle that was very strict. You had to know how many threads it took. 13 threads on a 1/2 inch bolt, 28 on a 1/4 inch bolt. You had to know that all the way to 1 inch. You'd better not have to come get the machinist manual to find out. And his way was tough, but you learned how to be a machinist.
You had 30 bulldozers in the unit. What were the things that were most likely to break to have that machine go down? You did some welding, and that's structural parts, but
If they come into a tree and got the right kind of pressure and got a upward tilt, they would pop that KG blade. They'd break sections out of it. And I cut, in order to keep from spending a week repairing 1 KG blade, I would cut that section out, and then I would trim enough off of the back of the other one to match the cutting edge, and then I would weld it back in and grind it. You couldn't tell it wasn't the original blade, because those 7018 wads welded on that T1 steel really good.
so most of what you did really was structural repair.
I did patched on radiators.
Did you lose bearings or anything in the diesel engine, or they just keep running?
Well, they had troubles with a few of them. There was a guy that was assigned to us that was assigned. He's one of the ones that brought the machinist van out. He was a specialist in diesel pump repair, and they changed a lot of those out. We performed burial services for a lot of copper radiators over there. We'd dig a hole, yank the protection off of the front of that dozer, pull the radiator off, dump it in the hole, put a new one on it. When we'd patch them as long as we could. But now, a lot of those kids, when they were first learning, they didn't know to keep that brush rolling in front of them blades instead of just trying to push straight forward. And you bow a tree up out there against another tree, and you've knocked all the limbs off of it, and it shoots up through that KG blade or bull blade. It's going through that radiator. And if you don't learn to watch for that kind of stuff, well, you patch a lot of radiators. That's probably the biggest job that we had over there was patching
Radiators.
There was one time that they was coming in to base to the little camp that we had for the night, and the man with a KG blade wasn't paying attention, and the guy in front of him with a bull blade, or it could have been a KG blade too, but anyway, he stopped dead still, and the KG blade cut about a 6-inch hole in that tank. And that guy that was operating that dozer was plenty PO'd, because if you got without a tractor, you didn't get to stay out there in the woods and that's where they wanted to be. And I don't remember, but we used, I believe it was a pressurized tank, and 1 or 2 times I used the exhaust. I flooded the tank with exhaust while the engine was running. Of course, that'll blow up too if you just burn through the metal. But this particular one, I think we did it with a CO2, and we cut a patch, placed it over that, and I welded it up, and I made the whole square without burning through. Because if I'd have burnt through, me and the guy helping me would have come home right then. But
You mentioned pushing down jungle, putting it in a heap, and burning timber. I asked a couple of your other fellows.
that smoke got heavy.
They didn't burn it, but when you got there
We
early on,
burned it.
you went out there with a jerry can of diesel and
Well, if you're going to be there over 7 days, that timber will sit up. It'll sour, and if you light it off at exactly the right time, you don't need a lot of diesel. If you wait 3 days, or if you start it 1 or 2 days early, you can't burn it. Now, I don't guess they had enough diesel over there to burn it if you didn't do it.
but
at the
you
right
did
time.
you did burn some.
We burned some.
Okay. You mentioned a machine and a guy being shotgunned. Now, was that 2 men on the same machine,
Well,
or
You couldn't walk around out there and watch for the VC in that jungle. You'd have got run over and killed. So they would mount an armed one of us. As a matter of fact, I don't know what the classification that they give them, but they had there was one man that was an operator, and there was one man that was the shotgun, and he was to help grease the machine when they needed to service it at night, and he helped work on it when it went down. And we found out real quick that before the operators got a lot of experience, they got better experience if they helped us fix them. And it wasn't take it to the motor pool and wait for it to be fixed. They had to help fix it. And that helped us keep everything going a whole lot. But I've got nothing but the deepest regards for the bunch that I went over there with, and what little I've talked to these folks out here, they the same way. They had a job and they did it.
you pretty much had come back before all these other boys in the what is
I
it,
think
538?
I think there was two in there that come in. One of them may have come in about the time that I was over there leaving, and there was a few that come in about midways. They was bringing new people in because they didn't want to lose what we had learned, and but most of these guys come in maybe as much as 6 months or a year or even more than that after we left.
Okay.
But I will tell you, from what I've read, they fell in there and did just exactly what we did.
Moving back, get out of the service, did you go up and apply at the fire department right away, Dallas?
We tried. My dad had a little old welding shop in 7 Points, and I tried to stay with it, and there just wasn't enough work down there, and I went. No boy come to my shop and told me he was going to go apply for the job on the fire department, and he told me the first time he was down there. He said, you have to be able to lift 100 pounds." And I said, "Okay, what else?" And we kept on talking, and I told him, "Man, I can lift 100 pounds with one hand." And he said, "You can't do it." And he went home, got his barbells, and I lifted the 100 pounds with either hand. He got mad and throwed his barbells and wouldn't let me ride with him to Dallas, and I went up there by myself and got a job. It was kind of a comical deal there.
You spent over 20 years, Dallas Fire Department, as a firefighter.
Yes.
With all your experience and your mechanical ability, I thought maybe you'd want to be an engineer. I assume that Dallas Fire Department has a firefighter, an engineer, and then I don't know.
I would have loved to have been an engineer. Now you're talking about
on the fire station.
An engineer that's a driver.
Well, they take care of the pumps and all that stuff here in town.
When you're a driver, I had to do that quite a few times, but I never.
But you got paid as a firefighter.
Yeah, but they didn't get paid much more in private.
Okay.
You didn't see much of a difference in paycheck until you got to be a chief, a battalion.
Battalion.
Chief. Yeah. But when I first went on, I was drawing Army pay for going to school, and that was $350 a month, and our paycheck on the fire department was like $700 starting out, and our battalion chief wasn't making as much money as I was drawing my school pay. They give me heck for a long time. They said private, and you ain't even worth $700 a month, and you're drawing thousands. Well, I'd run you off. But I thought as much of the fire department as I did that little deal, and I actually enjoyed the time that I was over there, because you go over there and feel sorry for yourself, it's going to last a long time. And if you go over there and play hard and work hard, it don't last very long.
You've mentioned play hard a couple times. What did you do when you played hard?
Well, in our trading to get my stuff to work with and everything, we came up with a bunch of Army mules. Now these are 4-wheel ammunition carriers. They're carriers for like on battle line or whatever. Right. And we needed those like we needed a hole in the head. And Parkinson, an old boy that was from up around Dallas, he said, "Let's get one of them to run him." He said, "I want to play with it a little bit." And he called it teaching a mule to jump. And you could set you 2 or 3 people on that thing on the back end, and you could pop them wheels, and it'd rear up and walk for 100 yards out through there. And we played with those till we tore them up, and it probably saved a lot of our lives. Have you ever seen a Lambretta?
Yeah.
The Vietnamese could move from 7 to 20 people on one of those things, and it was a 3-wheel vehicle about from here to that wall. And I saw one of those that run over a anti-tank mine in the road. They'd dig a hole and bury them, and then they'd set them a detonation deal, and hopefully it would get one of us. But it got that little old deal. There was 7 people on it, and the biggest piece that was left of that Lambretta I could have put in my pocket nearly. And we didn't need those Army mules out there where we was. So we played with them a while, and we let them go and went on. But actually, if once you got out in the woods, it wasn't as bad about walking around because of the mines. But I've heard them talk a little bit, and they probably, some of the guys run over bouncing Bettys, so they'd begin to mine the woods because they knew we was going to be in them. But most of the mines that I worried about was on the roads. I drove a truck what time I wasn't working. I drove a truck with a trailer, and we had 5 tons, and they were not big enough to handle going up and down that Mangyang Pass, because the brakes would fade on them, and if you didn't have it in a low gear to start with, you couldn't put it in one when it was rolling. And a bunch of these guys, they've been telling me about having 10-ton trucks, which they probably wasn't big enough, but they was better than a 5-ton. If you had a strong back and a weak mind, you could make it real good over there.
Charles, you have a much more interesting story than you seem to think, sir. We appreciate your time in the service.
When I came back, I'd finished my junior college. I wound up, I had 6 years of junior college.
Had lots of hours, huh?
Yeah. If you've been to college, that's a 2-year school. I'd tell my captains and stuff on the fire department about 6 years of junior college, and about 30 minutes they'd come back. You dumbass. Junior college is just 2 years. I said, yeah, but if you try real hard, you can make 6 years out of it.
Getting that $350 a month.
Yes. These kids coming back nowadays, I hear they're having a lot of trouble just getting help, and we need to do something to try to change that. I don't know. When we came back, if you was put out completely, they just more or less took care of you till you died. You know, injured real bad.
Yeah. And
there's people trying to get money together all over the United States now, helping these wounded warriors and everything. And if they really can't get enough help out of the government is falling far short of what they ought to do.
We appreciate your time today and your time in the service, sir.